look at what we have today. So we're going to be going over React composition patterns. Specifically, we'll spend most of the lesson on higher order components. We're going to kind of walk through, as I mentioned, this is a pretty advanced topic, and we're going to be walking through this, how to build higher order components pretty slowly, just one step at a time, because conceptually they're just hard to wrap your brain around, like, what is happening. It's not super obvious, like some of the stuff that we've seen so far. When you just look at the code, it can be kind of hard to understand what's really going on. So when we are done today and we are in project time, let me get to the project here. You'll go into the day 3 README, and this is where you should be at for today. And then today for the project, you'll be building a higher order component, or a hawk. And this hawk will not let users see the posts until they have logged in. And our login system will be faked using local storage. The job of this hawk will be to render a login page if the user is not logged in, then render the posts after the user is logged in. So this is probably the biggest use case for higher order components. It's the idea of conditional rendering. So we're going to render something based on some condition, or something else based on the inverse of that condition. So that's what we're going to do today. You will render a login page if there's no user in the local storage, or if there is user in the local storage, meaning that if they've logged in, then you'll render the posts page. Now what's nice about today is you'll notice that tasks is very long. There's a lot written out here for you. Because this is so complicated, we just go over the steps one at a time with you. So if you are just following each step at a time, you should be able to get through this by the end of the day today. So yeah, we'll come back and we'll look at this again one more time at the end of the lesson. Cool. So higher order components. What are higher order components? What is this even referring to? Does anyone have a yes for what a higher order component is? Okay, that's half of it. Yep, it takes a component as an argument. Oh, nice. Guessing a component that can generate other components. Yes, yes, that's the other half. So it's a component that takes a component as an argument, and it can generate, or it returns out of it, other components. Takes a function as an argument, not necessarily a function, more a component. Component that wraps other components and injects functionality. Oh, cool. So this is one of the reasons that we have higher order components. A higher order component will, oh, now I'm reading chances. Yo, dog, I heard you like components, so I put a component in your component to generate some more components. Yes. So higher order components. The simplest way that I can put it is a higher order component is a function. It's a functional component. It's a function that takes in a component as an argument and returns a new component and we build higher order components to extend the functionality of another component. So the whole purpose of building a higher order component is to extend some kind of functionality, like conditionally rendering something, or we'll see a couple more examples today. So for example, when you'll see this happening is, let's say that you have 5 different components that all do different things. They all have a different purpose, they all render different things to the screen. So we built out 5 components for those 5 specific things. Now let's say that all 5 of those share some kind of functionality. Like all 5 of them make the same API call for a user, or all 5 of them set some data to local storage. So instead of writing your fetch call out 5 times for those 5 different components, or instead of writing the logic to store something to local storage, we could write a higher order component that will take in one of those components, take in all of those components wherever they're at inside our app, and so you write the logic inside the higher order component. It takes in one of those components, it adds that logic to that component, and then returns a new component. And then that new component has all of the old components stuff in it, as well as the added functionality. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Yeah, like what Ed said, like it passes them down kind of like props. So it adds functionality to the components that it's taking in. Okay, in order to get started with this, we have to kind of step back. So I want to go through like we have to kind of go back to some very basics of JavaScript functions, and we're going to build off of knowledge that we know in JavaScript up to the point that we can see a higher order component coming together. So I'm going to go to Replit here. There we go. And we're going to do an ES6 REPL. I'll share this with you guys. Okay, so we're going to start with arrow functions. So let's take just a regular function, and this function is going to return 42. Pretty simple function. We invoke this function, and it would return 42. This isn't named. Notice that this isn't named. I'm not trying to write this or as in a project or anything. I just want you to start to see some patterns come out of this basic JavaScript that's going to help us understand higher order components a little bit better. So this right here is the same as writing something like this. Right? Here we have an unnamed anonymous function that returns the number 42. And here we have an unnamed anonymous function that returns the number 42. So remember, with arrow functions, anything to the right of the arrow, if it's a one-line function here, anything to the right of the arrow is the return value of that function. So this is what we call an implicit return. where we don't actually explicitly use the return keyword, we're implicitly returning the same thing here. We could write this another way. We could say, we could do this. So we can use an arrow function with brackets, but it's not on the same line, so we have to use the return keyword here. Or we could also implicitly return using this has the same implicit return using parentheses, but it's not a one-line function anymore, so we have to use parentheses there. So all of these functions are essentially do the exact same thing. So let's build this out a little bit more. Let's say function person. So now we have a named function. We're going to pass in a name to our person function, and it's going to return an object with a name property and the name that we pass into this function. So who can write this as an arrow function? Nice. Yep. Cool. Good job, guys. Perfect. So we have a function name called person, and usually we would do like const person is a function that is going to return an object. Now this is a little bit different because right now the function is going to think that this is the body of the function. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have to wrap this with parentheses so that the function knows that it's returning an object rather than this being the body of the function. Am I wrong there? Okay, that's what I was thinking. So we have to implicitly return a function because we've got these braces here. Same as you could do with a function body and just return something like that. Okay, good. So real quick, I'll just answer these. This is close. Higher order functions are very close to higher order. Oh, let's see. Higher order functions are first class functions in regular JS. Yes, maybe first class function plus clothing. Yeah, we'll look at this a little bit more. Yep. So the parentheses up here makes it so we can implicitly return something. So whatever comes on this line it has to be the return value. We can't say const number equals 42 and then number. That doesn't work. Whatever comes within these parentheses has to be the return value. Okay, cool. Arrow functions. Yay, we know all about arrow functions. Let's move on. We're going to look at functions as values, as arguments inside another function. So let's say that we have a function that's going to take in some function. And then it's going to invoke that function. This is pretty straightforward. We've seen this kind of pattern before. We pass in a function as an argument to execute. And when execute is called, it will invoke that function that gets passed in. So let's invoke execute with a function. We're just going to make this an anonymous function that is going to alert executed. And I need to comment all of this out for a moment before I can run our code here. Yay! An embedded page on this page says executed. Perfect. Okay, callbacks. Passing functions as arguments and invoking them inside our function. Cool, so let's now return a function from a function. Oh, this is getting good, guys. All right, let's say const get1 is a function that returns a function. So we're using an arrow function, so anything to the right of the arrow, if this is a one-liner, anything to the right of the arrow is the return value. And we want to return a function from this function. So how do we write functions again? Just like this, right? This is a function. We're going to return that from our function here. Doesn't that look crazy? Okay, let's break this down one piece at a time. We've got a function called get1 right here that is returning something. So we look to the right of the fat arrow. What is the value? What is to the right of the fat arrow? It's just a function. What does this function do? It just returns the number 1. So this inner function here returns the return value of this function that's being returned is the number 1. The return value of this function is this anonymous function here. So how could we get this to actually return the number 1? What do we do with get1 to actually return the number 1? Yeah, perfect. Okay, this is not gross. This is awesome. This is a this is what we call currying, by the way. So we're going to call get1. What happens when we call get1? It's going to return a function. Well, we can invoke functions, right? So this piece of code is going to get evaluated, and the value that's going to this is going to result in is a function. So we're going to invoke that function that get1 returned, and when we invoke that function, it's going to return 1. Oops. There we go. Yay, there we go. So we've returned the number 1. It looks gross now, but I promise you this will be this is really, really cool stuff. We'll get used to it very quickly. Okay, so let's do this real quick, just so we can understand this a little bit more. If I do console.log get1, what is going to be logged out here? Yeah, the function definition, right? So let's run that function. Okay, so then what is going to be logged if I do this? JSBin. Nope, we're not going to log 1 yet. We're only invoking this one time, right? So what's going to be logged the first time we run this function? Yeah, it's going to be the function that it returns. There we go. And then, of course, if we run it twice, we would get the number 1. We could do something like const inner func equals get 1, and then invoke inner func, and this would return 1, right? So we can use this to capture, we can capture the value of this into a variable and then have access to that variable. So we're kind of into callback land slash, what's the other C word? You guys said it up here earlier. Maybe it's not a C word. Closures. Closure land. Yeah, ha, beat you. So we're in callback and closure land. Yay, the most fun thing in the world. Okay, well, let's keep going. So we feel comfortable with this. We've seen closures. We understand that we can invoke this and set the return value of this to a variable. We understand currying like this. So let's try something cool with this code. We're going to do const multiply. And don't worry, I'll let you guys play around with this in just a minute. Okay, so const multiply is a function that takes in some number. It's going to return a function that also takes in a number, and this inner function is going to multiply those two numbers together. So if we invoke multiply with 5, and then again with 20, what is this going to return? $100 million. Okay, you guys got it right. 100. Perfect. So we understand that. This is closure at its most basic right here. But let's have some fun with this. We could do this same thing here. We could console log multiply and invoke it once, and then we would get a inner function returned out of it. But I think we understand that with these here. So let's do something cool. Let's say we're going to capture this inner function inside a variable. So I'm going to say const multiply by 5 equals multiply and invoke it by 5. So what is multiply by 5? If I could log out and it didn't just say some stupid thing like function, if you could log out exactly what the value of multiply by 5 is, what would it look like? Yep, x is now 5. Nice. This is McKay's is right here. Nope, we wouldn't get undefined yet. We would just get this inner function. So let's look at that. So we would get this returned to us. We get y, and then 5 times y. So this is what multiply by 5 equals right now. It's a function that takes in a number and multiplies that number by 5. Now, why does it work like that? Well, the first time that we invoke multiply, so here's multiply, here's our function. A function returns some value, right? This is what we looked at above. So if we look to the right of the fat arrow, everything to the right of the fat arrow is what is returned when we invoke multiply the first time. So if we invoke multiply with 5 passed into it, then we're essentially putting 5 here and 5 here. Then look at the right of the fat arrow. So what is returned when we invoke multiply, invoke multiply with the number 5? We get this function right here. You can see the syntax highlighting is helping us out. As I highlight this, it highlights what we wrote down here. So when we do this, we look at our function definition right here, and we say, what is to the right of the fat arrow? What's going to be returned when I invoke this function? Everything to the right of the fat arrow is, oh look, another function. So now we're invoking this, which returns this, and this return gets set to this variable. So now the value of this variable is a function. So we can take multiply by 5. We can invoke it by 1. Let's see, we did 20 above, right? You can do that by 20. And we'll get, let's see. Got to replace these back again. There we go. And we get 100 again. Or we could do multiply by 5 and invoke multiply by 5 with 100. And we get 500. Because multiply by 5 is just a function that takes in a number and multiplies that number by 5. Okay, we're going to pause for a minute. And for about 3 minutes, I want you guys to jump on this replit and create a function called multiply by, let's say multiply by 8. And then I want you to play around with it, make sure that that it behaves a lot like multiply by 5. That should be saved. If you guys jump on right now, does it get you up to this point? New link? I don't know. Share. Okay, jump on that link and write out a function called multiply by 8. Okay, does anyone have a good solution for our multiply by 8? Nice, I like it. There we go. If we run this, we should get 80. Cool. So this is pretty simple stuff here once we can wrap our minds around this weird syntax. So when we can wrap our minds around this, then we can start to understand what's happening with these interesting functions. Okay, so we've got callbacks, we've got closures. The next natural step, of course, is higher order functions. What is a higher order function? Yeah, perfect. Higher order functions are functions that take other functions in as an argument. What are some higher order functions that we use? Oh, Ryan beat me to it. So some higher order functions that we use a lot are map, for each. Can you guys think of any other ones? Reduce, the ugly one. Reduce is so good. Filter, good. Dot find. There's a whole bunch of them. So just a quick refresher. So this is like IE dot map dot filter dot reduce, etc., etc. So let's create a function called square. And this function is going to take in a number, and it's going to return that number times itself. And then let's write an array, and let's map off of this array, and we're going to pass in a function. So this might be a little weird because usually we're used to seeing like number, arrow function, number times number, right? Where we just pass in an anonymous function. Oh, that's weird. Let's get rid of these. So usually we see .map with an anonymous function like this. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with passing in a named or a variable that has a function like this. So if we run this, we get back our numbers squared. So map is a higher order function. One exercise, I don't know if you guys have done this before, but one exercise that's kind of cool and kind of helpful, especially if these functions don't quite make sense. An exercise you could do is find a tutorial online that rewrites .map, and then follow that tutorial, and it could help you understand higher order functions a little better. They're pretty cool. All right. Higher order functions leads us directly to the higher order components, or HOCs, or HOC, whichever you'd like to, however you'd like to say it. Okay, but before we jump into the higher order components, let's take a quick break. So I'll see you guys back in 5 minutes. Okie dokie. So, higher order components. What is a higher order component? We asked that earlier. So way back at the beginning, higher order component is a component that takes a component as an argument. Hey, like a higher order function. Returns a component. So this is where it's a little bit different than higher order functions, because higher order functions don't necessarily return components. But we've seen how we can return functions right up here, right? So it generates other components. That's kind of the same as returning component there. Let's see. So we're going to build a higher order component now that is going to take in a component, and it's going to transform that component's input to uppercase. So I'm going to go into Code Sandbox. And please follow along with me. Create your own sandbox here. And I will do my best to go at a pace that you guys can follow along. So those of you who have reached out to me or to your PMs with feedback that when you're trying to follow along, sometimes the pace is a little bit too fast. I apologize for that. So just let me know in Slack if we need to pause for a minute, and we can do that. Okay, we're going to build a higher order component that is going to take in a component and transform that component's text to uppercase. So let's take a look at how we would do that. We're going to do this within the same file right here so we can see the interconnecting pieces. So first, let's create a component called title. And you can do this, let's see, sorry, equals, there we go. So a lot of times you'll write functional components like this. This is a functional component, but just written as an arrow function. So this is valid syntax for a functional component. This component is going to return an h1 header that has some text in it. Hello, HOC world. Woohoo! And then we can render that component right here. Cool. So get to this point with me where we have a functional component that returns some JSX. Remember, everything to the right of the fat arrow is being returned. And then render that component here. Then we're going to build out a higher order component. And we're going to call this component yell. Okay, pause right there for a second. We're going to actually change up title just a little bit. So We're going to pass props into title, and we're going to delete hello HOC world, and in brackets we're going to do something cool. We're going to do props dot children. So passing in props dot children here means that where we are rendering our component, we actually have to pass something in between the opening tag and the closing tag. So what I mean by that is this is the opening tag right here. This is the closing tag. Anything that goes in between the opening and closing tag will be passed to title as a special prop called children. So right here, we're going to say hello HOC world. And I have to comment that out. And there we have HOC world. Now we can do, oh, dang it, come on. Now we can do something like this. So we're reusing our title component. And we're not passing in children like this. Children gets passed in between the opening and closing tags. So that's important for this use case. Sometimes you'll do something like this. Most of the time you'll just do what we've done previously. Okay, so we've got that. Now, let's get back to our yell HOC. So our yell HOC is a component, a functional component. So we've got a function that returns a component. Well, components are just functions, right? So we're going to return a function that's going to return some JSX. Okay, so let's look at this. Yell is a function that returns a function. And this function is going to implicitly return some JSX. Let's not do implicit returns for this example. Let's just do this, just to keep it a little bit cleaner, and then we'll come back to that. Okay, so we've got a function that returns a function. And in React land, functions are components, right? So this first function, we know that higher order components take in components as arguments, right? So we're going to pass in a component, passed component. So this is a foobar banana name. This doesn't have any significance outside in our file anywhere, only inside this function here. So we can name this whatever we want. When we invoke this function, we're going to pass it our title component. So title, when we do that, title component gets passed as passed component here. Okay, so what are we going to write inside our return here? Ooh, getting there. Ah, there we go. Yes, thank you, Peter. We're going to render our passed component. Okay, we have this function here. So yell is a function that takes in a component and returns a functional component. Functional components take in props, right? So here's our functional our functional component that's being returned by yell. And that component takes in props. And this component that's being returned is going to render whatever component we pass to yell. But we're going to do some extra stuff here. So this is pretty good so far. Any questions on this part of our higher order component yet? There we go. Now we're getting some good questions. Okay, don't worry, McKay, we will get there shortly. Why are we using props.children in the first place? It's just another, I mean, we don't have to use this. If you'd like, you can pass this in as title and then pass in this here. We don't really have anywhere else in the curriculum that we talk about props.children, so it's just a way for me to kind of teach that quick, simple concept during this lesson today. Where are props coming from? I assume you're talking about on line 18. These props right here. So this, line 15. Okay. Yeah. Let's say we wrote a functional component called app, and we pass some props to app. We would just pass those in right here, right? In an arrow function is a functional component that takes in props as an argument and then returns some JSX. So this is just a different syntax that you'll see a lot more when you get into kind of more higher level React writing. You'll see more and more people adopting arrow functions rather than these guys here. So we could write title out like this, and props, this would be kind of title, and then props would be passed in. So that is basically the same as that. So then we're not passing any props here to title, right? But remember, if you have a custom component that you're rendering inside your JSX, and you have an opening tag and a closing tag, we're used to seeing just this kind of pattern right here, right? But if you have one that has an opening tag and closing tag, and you have something in between those tags, that is passed to this component as a special prop called children. So our title component takes in props and has props.children passed to it. Okay, so let's do this. We're going to leave our HOC as it is right now, And we're going to create a new component called title 2. And we're going to set the value of title 2 to yell. We're going to invoke yell. We're going to pass in title like this. Then we're going to come up here and we're going to render our title 2 component. Oh no. And now it hates us. Okay, let's see if there's something going on here. Oh, what it is, we still have to render props.children inside here. Or we have to pass props through. Okay, so why isn't this working? I will be super excited. Oh, Edberg knows what's going on. Yeah. See, you got this. Be super excited if somebody knows what's going on, and Ed knows. So yell is taking in a title component, right? As past component. But we need to pass our props through for this component here, down to past component. So this is basically, in this example, this is basically replaced with title. But if we just render title up here, like that, we're not going to get anything, right? There's nothing passed to it. It's expecting children to be passed to it. So that's why this isn't working. On our props object, when we do this, this props object now has hello from title 2 as props.children. So if we just pass this through, this is some cool syntax here. Ding, ding, ding. Then we get our title coming through. Okay, raise your hand. I bet this is most of you. Raise your hand if you have basically no idea what just happened. And it's okay, because I'm assuming at this point that most people really have no idea what just happened. See, HOCs, they're very difficult. But that's okay, we will get this. Not sure what that is. Cool, all right. So let's break this down one step at a time. First, let's look at spread syntax. So we're going to jump back to here, and we're going to say const props equals an object that has children of hello world. Right, this is basically what we have going on inside our application, right? So if I do const props copy, and I create a new object, then we're going to use the spread operator to copy in every property from props into our props copy object. Then we're going to console.log props copy. Helps when you write things correctly. Okay, so our props copy has our children prop from props. There's props.children passed to it. So this is just a way to copy every property inside another object into a new object. So we've basically created a brand new object that's a copy of this object. This is a good way to not reference this object anymore. If we want to copy this object but we don't want to reference it inside our new object, then this is a good way to do that. What I mean by that is if we do props.children, we want to change this to equal goodbye world. What's going to console log now? Well, we're still going to get the same console log because we copied the props over, or the property over. We didn't just reference the property, which would follow any changes that happen. So we still get hello world. So that's just a side note. You don't really need to know or worry about that. Just know that we're creating a brand new object that doesn't care about the old object here. Okay, so that is the spread operator. This is actually doing the same thing as this. So when we do this, we have props.children, right? This will give our pass component children a children prop like this. So we're copying everything that's in props, we're passing it down to our past component, which essentially right here is title. So now by adding this and rendering this up here, we're passing title a children props, which it needs right here, and we're just passing this through as that children props. Okay, this is very convoluted. Did that help? Or do we need to look at it one more time? Okay, good question. Maybe Ed was right. Maybe we shouldn't have children in here. It can be a common thing with some different HOC situations. Yes, so Ryan's got it here. The spread operator passed all of the props through to our pass component. So yep, spread operators like slice. If we want to pass everything in state down to a child component, it would just be like this. Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Okay. Whew, man, this is getting crazy. Let's see, so the spread is going on the y, for example. Why would we not want to reference that value or property? We can. We could do it exactly like this. We could say children equals props.children, which In hindsight, would have been probably a better way to introduce this here. So, but we have it now, and we can see it here. These are basically the same things happening there. Man, Ed is on me today. Thanks for keeping me honest, Ed. All right, are you using props on line 76 for a reason, or is that foobar banana? 76, I don't see, oh. This is foobar banana. We're creating this variable here. I just referenced this right here. Okay, we're almost there, guys. We're getting close. Where does children come from? Where does children come from? Really good question. So let's delete this guy and let's just forget about all this, right? We don't care about our HOC right now. Let's worry about children. So in our title component, we are getting props.children passed from this right here, right? So when we are using our title component anywhere, whether it's up here or whether it's down here inside our HOC, we need to have some kind of children object coming through, or children something coming through, passed to the props of our title component, because that's what it's going to use to render out over here. So let's bring all this back in, and let's take a look at this. This might help if we think about this backwards. So let's think about this backwards. We've got title2 component being rendered, and it's rendering out its children, props.children string right here, right? So we see that happening right here. It's being rendered right there. If we were to inspect this, we would see something kind of cool here. This unknown, weird unknown tag. That's the HOC happening right there. So we inspect this, we see two title components being rendered. Crazy. This is what the HOC does. Okay, so they're rendering props.children. So essentially, this line right here, H1, is what is getting rendered by both of these lines here. Okay, so title 2. What is title 2? Well, let's go find where it's declared. So on line 24, we've declared title 2. What is the value of title 2? Can anyone tell me what the value is of title 2? Yes, it's a function. More specifically, a functional component. Ooh, good. That functional component is returning this function here. Okay, so let's look at that. Nice, yes. Oh, perfect. Okay, so what is the value of title 2? Well, we're setting title 2 equal to the return value of this function. So if we go back to our replit and we look at multiply by 5, remember multiply by 5, the value of multiply by 5 was whatever this invocation returned. Well, when we look at that invocation, it basically returns that with 5 as x, right? So we look at the function, we pass in the variable, And then we look at what that function returns. So let's do the same with yell. So we look at the function. So yell is a function that takes in a component. That component that we're passing in this case is title. So yell, when invoked with title, becomes a function, but we're going to replace pass component with title because that's what is getting passed in. This is just like replacing x with 5 for multiplied by 5. So yell gets invoked. Yell is this function here. Title gets passed through to past component. And the return value, if we replace past component with title, and then look at the return value, this right here is the return value. We basically just copied and pasted right there. So title2, the value of title2 is this function right here. Well, this is easy. Look at this. What if we do function sum component? Look at that. And then take away the arrow. If we take the arrow syntax out of it, we just now have a functional component. And this functional component just renders the title prop that we have right up here, or title component. So if we put it back to arrow syntax, now we can see that all this is a functional component that's going to render the title component. We know that title component renders props.children in this header tag. So we need props.children passed to our title component. And that's exactly what we're doing right here. We're just passing all of the props that come through to this component, to title2. Any props that title2 takes in gets passed to title with this syntax here. So if we had another prop, it would get passed through like this. Props.other prop. So this spread syntax will take every single property on the props object, and it will pass it down as a prop to title component. Okay, we're close. We're almost there. So how do we get props.children to title2? We can do it just like we did title right up here. We've got title2. We're going to pass in a string between the opening and closing brackets, and that passes props.children down to title2. So if this was function title2, this is another way that we could write it because we're basically setting the value of title2 as a functional component. Hello from title2. But instead of writing our own function, our own functional component that does the same exact thing as this, all we're doing is using our HOC to pass all of that value through to create this function for us, this component for us. Okay, any questions? Yes. I think these autosave actually saved. Okay, let's look at questions. So, yes, this is an anonymous function that's getting returned here. So let's change this back to our anonymous arrow function like this. So this is the value of title 2 is an anonymous function. Okay. Const title 2 is just replacing pass component with title, yes, within const, yeah. Yay, light bulb. Cool. Yeah, we'll take a look at this in the Chrome DevTools in just a minute. They're a little bit confusing, so I don't know that that will help a ton, but we'll take a look at it. Amen. Let's see. Title 2, hello from Title 2 is the same as Title 2, hello from Title 2. Let's see. Close. You'd have to wrap this. So when you have props coming in, this is an object. So you could do pass in an object, children, and then the title. Well, that doesn't quite work because this is an argument, right? Or this is a parameter, so this has to be some kind of variable. So close, I think you're getting the right idea. The syntax doesn't quite make sense, though, as far as components go. Okay, Brian's got it. Yes, good. All right, Samuel says the purpose here is going to be modify props. Yep. So let's take a look at it. So remember, we want to capitalize, change all of this to uppercase. So what we're going to do is this gets passed through as props. We know that we need to pass children down to our component here. So let's change this spread syntax to say children equals, and then we're going to do some JavaScript inside here. So we're going to say props.children to uppercase. And then invoke that. And now any component that we pass through with this syntax here to our yell higher order component is going to be uppercased. Cool. Who needs a break? Thanks, Hunter. Okay, let's take a little break. We'll take a 5-er, and then we'll come back, and you guys are going to work on one of these, on building something for yourselves real quick. Oh, my timer's gone. Cannot type. Timer 5 minutes. All right, see you in a few. Okay, come on back. I know I told you I was going to have you guys work on something on your own for a minute. We don't have time for that, but I'm going to post this in Slack, and if you have time, then this is something that you could do to kind of practice this kind of higher order component that we built here. You don't have to. This is definitely not anything you need to do unless you have extra time and want to practice HOCs. Okay, so sorry, yeah, this was maybe not the best way to approach since we're learning higher order components. So I recognize that now, and I'm really sorry that we introduced that in not a subtle way, not an easier way. Okay, that being said, let's do something a little different. So this component is, this higher order component basically transforms the children props to uppercase. And we could do a couple different things in here. We could you could take this component and very easily write an HOC that reverses its input, right? So there's lots of different things that you could do with kind of this setup. But this isn't the only situation that we see hawks being used. As I mentioned before, oftentimes we'll see higher order components used to render one thing based on a condition or something else based on the inverse of that condition. So let's take a look at that now. What we want to do is build an HOC. I think I'm going to start a new sandbox here. Huh. I think you guys have seen that before where it like copies over some of the stuff. That is weird. All right. So we're going to build an HOC that is going to be a conditional rendering hawk. So we're going to call this conditional render. Sure. Something silly. Okay. This is going to be a function that takes in a component and it's going to return a function that also takes in a component. Actually, we'll call this other component. And then this is going to render some JSX. So this is where currying comes in handy. We can chain this as long as we want, and inside our final return, where we're finally returning a component, we have access to everything that we've passed in along this currying chain. So this is where stuff gets kind of cool. So let's say that we have if props.show first is true, then we're going to return our first passed component. And we're going to pass through all of the props like that. else, let's see, now we need a one of those. Where do we have a doesn't like what we've done. That's okay. We'll move on and see if we can fix it. So we could write an else here, right? But we don't need to. This is a little bit redundant because if this is true, we're going to hit this return and this code will never be reached. So more often, you'll, instead of seeing else here, you'll just see return and then our second or other component here. We're going to pass through props. And there we go. Okay, so this is pretty simple to look at and kind of reason about. We're going to invoke conditional render HOC twice. We're going to pass it one component, then another component. And then we're going to check some condition. And based on that condition, we're going to render one or the other. So let's write two components. Maybe this will be a little bit easier if we write them as functions, as we've seen before. So first, takes in props. And it's going to return some JSX, but yeah, we'll just get rid of this. And we're going to say H1, hi, I'm the first. And then we'll do kind of the same thing for the second. Okay, so now we have two different components here. Let's open this up and see if it's still yelling at me. Cons conditional render, unexpected token, expected. Maybe you guys see if there's something I'm missing. Oh, yes, thank you. That should do it. Okay, awesome. Who was that? Okay, 15 points for your Hogwarts house of choice. And yours too. All right, so we're going to create, we're not going to render any of these things yet, because we're going to remember that our HOC returns a brand new component. Even though it's rendering one of these two, it still is a brand new component. So we need to capture that component in some value. And we're going to call this show first. Or show, let's see, show conditionally. There we go. So now we're going to capture the return of this higher order component in this variable here. So to do that, we're going to invoke conditional render with, we're going to pass in our first component. We're going to invoke it again with second component. And then we have our show conditionally component here. Okay, so how do we set this up now to render our something on the screen? Let's go up here, and inside our app component, we're going to render something. Let's set it up so that we render our first component. So we want to see H1, hi, I'm the first. So what are we gonna write right here inside our app div? Any thoughts? Nice. Yes. Awesome. Okay. Adam and David. So we could just render first, right? But we want to pass this through our conditional render hawk. So we're going to render show conditionally, which I think you guys had up here, show conditionally. And, oh, you're good, no worries. So, and there's a couple ways we could do this. We could do it like this, and then show first would be false, because we don't have that pass through as a prop, right? We could do it like this, but there's actually different syntax when we want to pass the value true in as a component. So let's try this first. And there we go. If we change this to false, ugh. By the way, another shortcut for you if you want to pass in true, you don't have to pass in the value like that. All you have to do is pass in that, and it will be passed through as true. So just a heads up. We could do all this again, right? And pass that through as false. Hi, I'm the first. Hi, I'm the second. Okay. How do you feel with this setup? Is this a little bit better? And I would expect nothing less than your honest opinion. Cool. What? There's 1,000? I didn't even know that was a thing. Nice. Yes. Yeah, that's a cool way to put it. So remember with React, we're just trying to compose our UI in a smart way, right? So yeah, we're just composing things in a different way, but kind of a really cool, reusable pattern. Okay, let's make this a little bit, let's add a little bit more to this. Don't worry, we're not going to change what's going on here because this seems to be making sense to us now. Let's change this to a class app extends React docs component. And we're going to have constructor, not passing any props. And have a state object called show first. It's going to start out as false. You guys can probably see where I'm going with this. Ooh, now let's make this really fun. Let's add a button. Oh yeah, this needs to be inside a render. Okay, what is our button going to do? I'm assuming that most of you have guessed, but it's going to invoke a function called toggle hawk. And all that's going to do is take in an event. A lot of times you'll see event shorthanded down to EV. And we're going to say this.setState show first is going to be the opposite of this.state.show first. So the idea here is when we click on our button, on click of this.toggle HOC. When we click on our button, it's going to change this value from false to true and true to false to true, et cetera, et cetera. And that will toggle our prop here. Our prop gets passed down right here as props.showFirst. And then we're conditionally rendering one component or another based on what that value is. Kind of cool stuff. Now, let's break these out into their own components. And then I'll give you this project here, and you can see, have a good reference for your project today. We call this first.js. We're going to build one called second.js. We're going to build one called render conditionally.js. Notice, by the way, we didn't talk about this, but you may have noticed that our HOCs are lowercased. So let's rename that font meshes. But this is on purpose. HOCs do not get rendered inside JSX. Because they don't get rendered inside JSX, they're basically just a function, right? So we're going to go with the lowercase naming convention, even though we call these higher order components. Technically is a component, but you never ever render inside JSX a higher order component. You will create a new component by invoking a higher order component, but you'll never see conditional render inside JSX. Okay, conditional render.js. And I think 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's see. Hold on 1 second. I apologize. My 4-year-old son's having a birthday party today with lots of other 4-year-olds in the house. Give me 2 seconds to call in the cavalry. All right, cavalry has taken charge. And she apologized profusely to all of you guys. Okay, so we're going to move this first out of here. And we're going to import React from React. And we're going to export default first. Okay, so there's that one. Then, same thing here. Import React from React. And there's our function. And we're going to export default second. I'm going to change this one up just a little bit to be, instead of this syntax, we're going to change this to a functional component, or functional, not functional, it is a functional component, an arrow function. Just so you guys have that syntax, you can see that syntax. Same exact thing as what we had before. You can reference first on to compare between the different syntax there. All right, and finally, conditional render. We will pull out of index.js. Notice we don't have to import React. Maybe we do. Let's try it. We probably do because of that. I don't know. We'll see if it works. We may have to add React up there. Okay, we're going to save all. We're going to go into index because we don't have conditional render first or second. So we need to import all of those things. We're going to copy, paste. Yep, React is not defined. All right. And there we go. So let's take a look at this. We'll do one more quick pass over this project. And just so we can verbalize what's happening here, and then we'll look at the today's part of our InstaClone project and how we're going to implement an HOC in there. So we've got our HOC and conditional render that we know needs to be invoked twice. So we're going to pass it two components. And then based on the value of this piece of data, we're going to render either the first or the second. Now, conditional render, this HOC returns, when we invoke it twice, it returns a functional component. By the way, HOCs can return class components, in case you were wondering. That is a thing. So when we invoke this twice, it's going to return a functional component, and we set that functional component as the value of show conditionally. And show conditionally is this component right here. It takes in props, and it checks props.show first. So we need show first passed as a prop right here. And depending on this value, if it's true, we're gonna pass in we're gonna render the passed component. If it's false, we're gonna render the other component. So that's what happens here. Our button toggles the show first, this.states.show first value, which is what toggles everything inside shell conditionally. Okay, before we look at our homework, before we look at our project, we need to do one last little thing, and that is look at localhost or local storage. Why do I keep doing that? Local storage. Okay, local storage. So local storage is oh cool, puts a lot of stuff on local storage. Perfect. Momentum. Local storage is basically a database that lives inside your browser. So on the window object. So you can take a look at what's on local storage on any given page. And Momentum puts a lot of stuff onto local storage here. Another way to look at it is if we go into application, then click on local storage, open that up and click on, here we go, on this part here. You can see all the data that's on local storage here. We could clear this out, but then I'd lose like my name. I don't want to lose my name. And I'd lose my login, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to clear this out, but you could clear it out. All right, so back at our console, window.localStorage has some built-in functions. We can do get item, and for get item, we pass in a string of the item we want to get. So let's say active date. So we're going to pass in active date, and we get that value. We can do local storage dot set item, and let's say is logged in. Not that that's what referring to the project at all, but I don't know. Or let's say user. Yeah, we'll do that. User name, and we'll set a string. So with set item, you need to pass the property name and the property value. We'll say Dustin. Then if we get item username, we get that value back. We can go in application, and we can find username right there. A couple other ones that you could be aware of is delete, let's see, remove item. So we can remove username, and then we no longer have username. And then I think there's like a clear all or something like that. .clear maybe, but I don't want to do that on this page. So those are the three big ones: get item, set item, get item, and remove item. Cool. Finally, last but not least, is kind of this arbitrary objective here. This doesn't really have anything to do with code. This is just, it's kind of a cool thing to learn about and know, but doesn't really have an impact on any of our projects, on any of our sprints. The real reason we have this here is every day module needs 2 objectives. And this was, so far we had only had higher order component as an objective, so this just lives here. So we're not going to cover this in class today because obviously we've run out of time. But please, if you haven't read it, go to Training Kit, watch the video, and follow along, do the follow along and the challenge. With this being said, so learn to explain why state-driven views and components are useful patterns. This is stuff that we've we basically covered and talked about in the almost 2 weeks that we've been in this class. So this is stuff that you should feel comfortable with. If you feel like you are struggling with React architecture, then definitely go read this objective. If you're just kind of struggling with the overall organization of building a React application, then please go read this. Okay. Whew. Let's look at today's project one last time. And then I'm going to go take a nap because higher order components are tough. All right. So you'll be building a higher order component that will not let users see posts until they have logged in. Our login system for this will be faked using local storage, not local host, local storage. The job of the HOC will be to render a login page if the user is not logged in, then render the posts after the user is logged in. So to start off, you're going to create a post page in your components directory, posts container directory, and you'll have to move a lot of what you've done inside app.js to this new component because you want your posts page and your new login page to get passed into your higher order component inside your app.js. And then inside your app.js, your higher order component will determine which of those gets rendered. So you'll have to move probably a lot of what you're doing in app.js to post page, and then you'll end up with an app.js that looks something like this. Okay, build the higher order component. Create a directory called authentication. Inside the directory, create a component called authenticate. This is where the magic stuff is going to happen. This component should be able to take any component as an argument, and it will return a class component. Inside, sorry, I didn't realize that was part of the project. I'll show you that real quick before we jump off today. Inside of authenticate's render method, you want to return the component that gets passed to it. Be sure to export this component, head over to app.js and import our new authenticate higher order component and pass in app. If this worked right, then everything should render as it used to. Authenticate will look a lot like this when we're done setting it up. Okay, so here we have an example of a higher order component that takes in a component and returns a class. So there's the syntax for you. It's same thing as returning a functional component. It says just a classical component. Okay, then so follow those steps, build out your login component, and then you're going to extend the functionality of the HOC to conditionally render your login page or your post page. Okay, guys, take a good lunch, and good luck with HOCs today. I will tell you now that this is the only time that you'll be writing higher order components with Lambda, or at least through these 5 weeks. You may choose to do so in some of your labs projects, but for your sprint project, you're not going to be required to write a higher order component. For your React week long project in a couple weeks, you won't see higher order components at all. So just have fun with this today. If it's tough and it doesn't make sense, that's all right. This is a really advanced topic and one that we wanted to give you exposure to because it's becoming more and more relevant but not something that you have to have down perfect. So if it's really hard, don't stress it. Tomorrow's going to be an easy day, and then you're into the weekend. So, by the way, I am gone tomorrow and Friday, and Ryan Hamblin is going to be your guys' instructor tomorrow and Friday. So, yeah, that being said, enjoy your awesome weekend. Good luck on your sprints, and I will see you guys next week.